The prisoner transport ship moved slowly through the darkness of space. Inside the small holding area, a human man sat alone on a metal bench. His hands were locked in energy cuffs that glowed with a soft blue light. His name was Daniel Price, and he was 63 years old. The Valorian guard watching him was named Kethral. He was young for his species, barely 200 years old. His skin was pale gray, and he stood 8 feet tall, towering over the human prisoner. Kethral had been given this job as a punishment. Guarding a single human was considered boring work, far beneath a soldier of his noble family. Kethral looked at the human with disgust. He had been taught since childhood that humans were weak creatures. They lived short lives. They were emotional and foolish. The Great War had proven their weakness 30 years ago, when the mighty Valorian Empire had crushed their fleets and forced them to surrender. "You are quiet," Kethral said. His translator device turned his words into human speech. Most humans talk too much. Daniel lifted his head slowly. His eyes were pale blue, and they looked tired. Not the tiredness of missing sleep, but something deeper. The tiredness of a man who had seen too much. "Nothing to say," Daniel replied. His voice was calm and steady. "You were caught in restricted space," Kethral continued. He enjoyed hearing himself talk. "The border territories have been closed to humans for 30 years. What were you doing there? Looking for something. Looking for what? There's nothing in those sectors except old battle wreckage and dead planets." Daniel did not answer. He simply closed his eyes and leaned back against the cold wall dot. This made Kethral angry. He had expected the human to beg for mercy. He had expected crying and excuses. That was what humans did. They were cowards who would say anything to save themselves. "Take off your jacket," Kethral ordered suddenly. "I need to record your physical details for processing." Daniel opened his eyes. "Is that really necessary?" "I give orders. You obey. That is how this works." For a long moment, the human just looked at him. Then he shrugged and removed his worn leather jacket. It fell to the floor with a soft sound. Under the jacket, Daniel wore only a thin shirt. As the fabric moved against his skin, Kethral saw something that made him freeze. Tattoos. The human's arms were covered with tattoos. Dozens of them, spreading from his wrists up past his elbows and disappearing under his sleeves. But these were not random pictures. These were images that Kethral recognized, symbols that made his blood turn cold. On Daniel's left forearm, there was a detailed picture of a spaceship. Below it, words were written in flowing human script. USS Defiant. Kethral stopped breathing. "That ship," he whispered. "The Defiant. That is the vessel that broke the siege of Caldera 9. Daniel said nothing. Kethral's eyes moved to the human's right arm. There he saw another image, a planet surrounded by flames. A date was marked beneath it. Kethral knew that date. Every Valorian knew it. It was the day humans had attacked Vega Station and destroyed an entire Valorian war fleet in just a few hours. "Who are you?" Kethral demanded. His voice was shaking now. "What is your military rank?" "I told you," Daniel said quietly. "I am retired. These markings on your skin, they tell stories. Stories of battles, of wars." Kethral stepped closer, his eyes scanning every tattoo he could see. The siege of Caldera 9, the battle of the Crimson Nebula, the fall of Fortress Kethmar. He stopped. His mouth went dry. "Fortress Kethmar," he repeated. "That fortress was named after my grandfather. He commanded 12,000 Valorian soldiers there. They were all killed in a single night by a human attack force. We never found out who led that attack." Daniel remained silent. His face showed nothing. "You were there," Kethral breathed. "You were part of it. I was part of many things." Kethral stumbled backward. His hand reached for the weapon on his belt. For the first time in his entire life, he felt real fear while looking at a human. "What are you?" he asked. Daniel Price stood up slowly. Even with his hands bound, even with his gray hair and lined face, he seemed to fill the entire room. There was something about him, something that made Kethral's two hearts beat faster. "I am a veteran," Daniel said. "Same as any soldier. I fought in a war one did not start. I fought for people I loved. I fought against an enemy that wanted to destroy everything I cared about. When the war ended, I tried to forget." He lifted his arms, and Kethral saw more tattoos on the inside of his forearms. Names. Dozens of names, written in small, careful letters. Human names. "These are the ones I could not save," Daniel continued. "Friends who died. Soldiers who served under my command and never came home. I carry their names because someone has to remember them." Kethral's translator made a crackling sound as it tried to handle the emotion in the human's voice. "The war ended 30 years ago," the young Valorian said. "Why did you come back to the border territories? What were you searching for?" Daniel looked at him. In that moment, Kethral saw something in the human's eyes that went beyond species, beyond the hatred between their peoples, beyond everything he had been taught. "My son," Daniel said. "His ship went down in the final battle of the war. They never found the crew. I have been searching for them ever since." The transport ship continued moving through space, carrying its prisoner toward whatever fate awaited him. But inside the holding area, something had changed. A young Valorian soldier stood frozen in place. Everything he believed about humans was breaking apart inside his mind. He stared at the bound human veteran, at the stories written on his skin in ink and memory. Daniel Price was not a monster. He was not a savage. He was a father who had spent 30 years searching for his lost child. Kethral thought about his own father. He thought about what his father would do if Kethral ever went missing. Would he search for 30 years? Would he risk everything, even entering enemy space, just to find answers? The young soldier did not know the answer. But he knew one thing for certain. Everything he had been taught about humans was wrong. He looked at Daniel Price with new eyes. Not the eyes of a guard looking at a prisoner. Not the eyes of a Valorian looking at a human. Just one person looking at another. "I am sorry," Kethral said quietly. "About your son." Daniel nodded slowly. "Thank you." They did not speak again for the rest of the journey. But something had passed between them in that holding cell. A small crack had formed in the wall of hatred that separated their species. Neither of them knew it yet. But that small crack would eventually bring down the entire wall. The Valorian detention center on Velaris Prime was a terrifying place. Huge towers of black stone reached up toward the purple sky. Energy barriers surrounded the entire complex, powerful enough to destroy any ship that came too close without permission. Daniel Price was brought through the main entrance like any other prisoner. Guards took his belongings. Machines scanned his body. They gave him a number instead of a name and put him in a cell deep underground, where the only light came from dim panels in the ceiling. But Kethral could not stop thinking about what he had seen in the days after bringing Daniel to the prison. The young soldier found himself unable to sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the tattoos on the human's arms. He heard the human's voice saying those simple words, "My son." Kethral had grown up hearing stories about humans. His teacher said humans were brutal killers with no honor. His father said they were animals who deserved to be conquered. His grandfather had died fighting them at Fortress Kethmer, killed by human soldiers in the middle of the night. But Daniel Price did not seem like an animal. He seemed tired and sad. He seemed like a father who missed his child. Kethral decided to learn more as a soldier from a noble family. He had access to military records that regular citizens could never see. He went to the Imperial Archive, a massive building filled with computers that held information about every battle ever fought by the Valorian Empire. He searched for the USS Defiant, the ship tattooed on Daniel's arm. What he found changed everything he thought he knew. The USS Defiant was a small human warship assigned to protect a colony called Caldera 9 during the fourth year of the Great War. Valorian forces surrounded the planet. They blocked all supply ships. They bombed the surface from space. 2 million human civilians lived on that planet, and the Valorian commanders gave them a choice: surrender or die. The colony's governor chose to surrender, but the captain of the Defiant refused. According to the records, this captain gathered the remaining human ships and launched an attack that no one expected. For 3 days, using tactics that Valorian commanders had never seen before, the humans fought their way through the blockade. They managed to rescue almost 1 million civilians before the colony finally fell. The captain's name was listed as D. Price. Catherall sat alone in the dark archive room, staring at the glowing words on his screen. His hands were shaking. The humans at Caldera 9 had not been trying to win the war. They had been trying to save civilians, women, children, families, who had nothing to do with fighting. This did not match anything Catherall had been taught. That night, he went back to the detention center. The guards recognized him and let him pass without questions. He walked down to the lower levels until he reached Daniel's cell. The human was sitting on his small bed, staring at the wall. He did not look up when Catherall arrived. "I read about Caldera 9, Catherall said through the energy barrier. "Did you? The records say you saved over 800,000 civilians. You got them off the planet before our ships destroyed everything." Daniel finally turned his head. In the dim light, his face looked very old and very tired. "We did not save enough," he said quietly. "The records also say your ship was destroyed during the rescue. You spent 6 months floating in space in a damaged escape pod before anyone found you. That sounds right." Catherall pressed his hand against the energy barrier. He could feel it humming against his palm. "Why did you do it?" he asked. "Why would you destroy your ship and risk your crew to save colonists you had never met?" "Because they were people," Daniel said. "Because someone had to help them, and we were the only ones who could. But they were not soldiers. They could not help you win the war. That is exactly why they needed us." Catherall struggled to understand this. In Valorian culture, the strong took care of themselves. The weak either served the strong or they died. The idea of sacrificing military ships to save ordinary people was strange. It did not make sense. "You humans are very different from us," he said. "Maybe," Daniel agreed. "Or maybe we just remember something your people forgot a long time ago. What is that?" Daniel stood up from his bed and walked toward the barrier. Even though one was a prisoner and one was a guard, they stood almost face to face. "Real strength is not about hurting people who are weaker than you," Daniel said. "Real strength is about protecting them. A species that cannot understand this will never be truly strong. It will just be powerful. And power without purpose is just violence." Catherall had nothing to say to this. He left the detention center that night feeling confused and troubled. But he also made a decision. He would learn more about this human. He would find out if Daniel Price was telling the truth about his son. Over the next few weeks, Catherall spent every free moment in the archives. He read about every battle Daniel had fought in. He read about human culture and human history. He read about the Great War from the human perspective, not just the Valorian one. What he learned surprised him again and again. The humans had not started the war. The Valorian Empire had invaded their space, destroyed their colonies, and demanded their surrender. The humans had fought back, not because they wanted to conquer anyone, but because they wanted to survive. And the battles that Keth, Raoul's people celebrated as great victories were often massacres of civilians who had no way to defend themselves. Kethro thought about his grandfather, who had died at Fortress Kethmar. He had always been told that his grandfather was a hero who died fighting savage human attackers. But now he wondered, what had his grandfather done before those humans attacked? What orders had he followed? How many innocent people had he killed? These thoughts kept Kethrol awake at night. They made him question everything his family had told him. They made him wonder if the Valorian Empire was really as honorable as everyone believed. One evening, he returned to Daniel's cell with a question that had been bothering him for days. "If you hate us so much," Kethrol asked, "why did you not try to escape when I transported you here? You are clearly a skilled warrior. You could have tried to fight me." Daniel looked at him for a long moment. "I am tired of fighting," he finally said. "I spent 20 years fighting in the war. I have spent 30 years fighting to find my son. I do not want to hurt anyone else. I just want answers. Do you really believe your son might still be alive after all this time?" "Probably not," Daniel admitted. "But I have to know for certain. I have to find out what happened to him." A father cannot simply give up on his child. Kethrol nodded slowly. He understood this, even though humans and Valorians were very different. The love between parents and children was something all species shared. "I will help you," Kethrol said suddenly. Daniel's eyes widened with surprise. "What? I do not know how yet, but I will try to find out what happened to your son's ship. I have access to military records. Maybe there is information about survivors. Why would you do this for me? I am your enemy." Kethrol thought about this question carefully before answering. "Because I am starting to think," he said slowly, "that maybe we were never supposed to be enemies at all." He turned and walked away, leaving Daniel alone in his cell. But for the first time in 30 years, the old veteran felt something he had almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. The Grand Hall of Justice was the largest building in the Valorian capital. Its ceiling rose so high that clouds sometimes formed inside it. For 10,000 years, the most important decisions in the Empire had been made within its walls. Daniel Price stood before the Council of 7 judges. He wore a gray prisoner uniform. His hands were bound. Guards stood on either side of him with weapons ready. The charges against him were serious: entering restricted space, trespassing in Valorian territory, and suspicion of war crimes during the Great War. The prosecutor was a tall Valorian with cold eyes and no mercy in his voice. He presented evidence against Daniel for nearly 2 hours. He showed images of destroyed Valorian ships. He listed the names of battles where humans had killed Valorian soldiers. He pointed at Daniel's tattoos and called them proof of guilt. "This human carries the marks of a killer on his body," the prosecutor said loudly. "Each tattoo represents Valorian lives lost. Each image is a confession of murder." The 7 judges nodded their heads. They had already decided Daniel was guilty. Everyone in the room knew it. The trial was just for show. Daniel stood quietly and said nothing. He had known this would happen. He had accepted his fate the moment he entered Valorian space. Finding his son was worth any price, even his own life. The head judge, an ancient Valorian with white skin and red eyes, was about to announce the verdict when something unexpected happened. Kethrol stepped forward from the crowd. "I wish to speak for the prisoner," he said loudly. The entire hall went silent. The prosecutor turned around with shock on his face. The judges looked at each other in confusion. "You are the soldier who brought this prisoner to Valorous Prime," the head judge said slowly. "Why would you speak for a human?" "Because I have learned things that this court needs to hear before making a judgment." The prosecutor moved to object, but the head judge raised his hand for silence. Under Valorian law, any citizen could speak at a trial. It was an ancient right that could not be denied. "Speak then," the head judge said. "But choose your words carefully. There may be consequences." Kethral walked to the center of the room. He was young and small compared to the judges who had lived for thousands of years. His voice should have been weak, but when he spoke, everyone listened. "I was taught that humans were savages," Kethral began. "My teachers told me they had no honor. My father told me they were animals. My grandfather died fighting them, and I grew up hating them for his death." He paused and looked at Daniel. "But I have read the true records. Not the stories we tell our children. The real history of the Great War. And I have learned that humans did not fight us because they wanted to conquer us. They fought because we gave them no choice." The prosecutor stood up angrily. "This is outrageous. This soldier is defending our enemy." "I am speaking," Kethral said firmly, and something in his voice made the prosecutor sit back down. "The man you want to execute is Daniel Price. He commanded the ship that saved 800,000 civilians at Caldera 9. These were not soldiers. They were families, children, old people who could not fight. He risked everything to rescue them." Kethral turned to face the judges directly. He has spent the last 30 years searching for his son. His son's ship disappeared during the final battle of the war. Daniel came to our space not as a spy or an invader. He came as a father looking for his child. The head judge leaned forward in his chair. "You speak well, young soldier. But what do you expect us to do? Release him? Let humans think they can enter our territory whenever they want?" "I expect you to see him as he really is," Kethral replied. "Not as a symbol of a war that ended 30 years ago. Not as a monster or a savage, but as a person. A veteran who carries his memories and his losses on his skin for everyone to see." He pointed at Daniel's arms. "Look at those tattoos. Yes, they show battles, but they also show the names of friends he lost. Soldiers who died under his command. He carries those names because he believes someone should remember them. Is that the behavior of a savage? Is that what an animal does?" The judges were silent now. They were actually listening. "If we execute this man," Kethral continued, "what do we prove? That we are powerful? We already know we are powerful. But if we show mercy, if we choose to see him as a person instead of an enemy, we prove something much more important." "What is that?" the head judge asked. Kethral lifted his chin proudly. "That we are capable of becoming better." The judges sent everyone out of the hall while they discussed the case. 3 hours passed. Daniel sat in a small room with guards watching him. He did not know what would happen. He had expected to die today. Now he was not sure. Finally, the doors opened and he was brought back into the grand hall. The head judge looked down at him with an expression that was hard to read. "We have reached a decision," the old Valorian said. "The prisoner Daniel Price will not be executed." A wave of shocked whispers went through the crowd. "He will be released into the care of Soldier Kethral," the judge continued. "Kethral will be responsible for his behavior. If the human causes any trouble, both of them will face punishment." It was not freedom. Not exactly. But it was not death either. As the guards removed Daniel's restraints, Kethral approached him. "Why did you do that?" Daniel asked quietly. "You have put yourself in danger for me." Kethral looked at the old human, at the markings on his arms, at the tears that were forming in his tired blue eyes. "Someone once told me that real strength is about protecting the weak," Kethral said. "I am trying to understand what that means." Daniel reached out and gripped Kethral's arm in the human gesture of respect between warriors. "Thank you," he said. "Whatever happens next, thank you." They walked out of the grand hall together. The purple sky of Valorous Prime stretched above them, filled with stars that had watched empires rise and fall for millions of years. Neither of them knew what the future would bring, but they both knew that something had changed today. A young Valorian had stood up for a human prisoner in front of the entire empire. He had challenged everything his people believed. It was a small thing. One voice against centuries of hatred. But sometimes, that is how great changes begin. Outside the hall, Kethril stopped walking and turned to face Daniel. "I have been searching the military archives," he said quietly, "looking for information about ships that went missing during the final battle of the war." Daniel's face went pale. "Did you find something?" "Maybe. There are records of a human ship that was discovered 3 months after the war ended. It was damaged but not destroyed. There were survivors in emergency stasis." "Survivors?" Daniel's voice cracked. "Where are they?" "They were taken to a research facility. The records do not say what happened after that, but I am still looking." Daniel grabbed Kethril's shoulders. His grip was strong for an old man. "If my son is alive somewhere," he said, "I will do anything to find him. Anything." Kethril nodded. "I know. That is why I am helping you." They stood there in the fading light, human and Valorian, former enemies who were becoming something else. Something new. Hope was a dangerous thing. It could lift you up or destroy you completely. But Daniel Price had carried hope in his heart for 30 years, and he was not going to let it go now. Not when he was finally so close to the truth. Under Valorian law, Daniel Price was now a ward of the state. This meant he was not exactly free, but he was not a prisoner either. He could go places and do things, but only with Kethril watching him. If Daniel caused any problems, both of them would be punished. At first, Kethril treated this duty like a job. He watched Daniel carefully, followed him everywhere, and reported his activities to his commanders. But as days turned into weeks, something changed between them. They started talking. Daniel told Kethril about Earth, the planet where humans came from. He described blue skies that were different from the purple sky of Valorous Prime. He talked about green forests and wide oceans and cities filled with millions of people. "It sounds beautiful," Kethril said one evening as they sat in his small apartment. "It was," Daniel agreed. "I have not been back in a very long time. After the war, I could not stay in one place. I kept moving, kept searching. For your son. For Christopher, yes." Daniel's eyes grew distant whenever he spoke about his son. Kethril could see the pain there, the loss that had never healed. "Tell me about him," Kethril said. Daniel smiled softly. It was the first time Kethril had seen him smile. He was 22 when he joined the military. Just a kid, really. Fresh out of training. He had his mother's eyes. Brown, like chocolate. And her smile, too. Daniel's voice became quieter. "Margaret died during the war. A bombing raid hit our home colony. After that, it was just Christopher and me." "What happened to his ship?" "It was a reconnaissance mission. His crew was supposed to fly behind enemy lines and gather information about Valorian fleet movements. They never came back." Daniel shook his head slowly. "No distress signal. No wreckage. Nothing. They just vanished. And you have been searching ever since. 30 years. Daniel held up his hands and looked at them. They were rough and scarred. The hands of a man who had worked hard his entire life. Every few years, when I could save enough money to buy fuel and supplies, I would go back to where he disappeared. I would search the debris fields, scan every rock and asteroid, hoping to find something. Anything. But you never did." "No, I never did. Until now." Kethril had been working secretly for weeks, digging through military files that were supposed to be restricted. What he found gave him both hope and fear. "I found more information," Kethril said carefully. About the survivors who were taken from that human ship. Daniel sat up straight. His entire body was tense. Tell me. They were brought to a place called Station Erebus. It is a research facility on the edge of known space, deep in the restricted zone. The records say the station was doing experiments on captured humans. Daniel's face went pale. Experiments? I do not know what kind. The files are classified. But there is good news. Catherall leaned forward. The station was closed 15 years ago. Whatever they were doing there, they stopped. And the station itself still exists. It was abandoned, not destroyed. So the survivors might still be there? After all this time? Maybe. If they were kept in stasis, they could still be alive. Daniel stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the twin suns of Valorous Prime were setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Station Erebus is in the restricted zone, Daniel said. The same zone where I was arrested. Yes, if we go there, you will be breaking the law. You could lose everything. Your career, your freedom, your life. Catherall stood up and joined Daniel at the window. I have already lost the respect of my family, he said. When I spoke for you at the tribunal, my father sent me a message. He said I was no longer his son. He said I had shamed our entire bloodline by defending a human. I am sorry. Do not be. For the first time in my life, I did something I actually believe in. I stood up for what is right, even when it was hard. Catherall turned to face Daniel. I want to help you find your son. I want to know if he is still alive. Why? Why does this matter so much to you? Catherall thought about the question for a long moment before answering. Because I have spent my whole life following orders without asking why. I was told humans were evil, so I believed it. I was told the war was righteous, so I accepted it. I never questioned anything. He shook his head. But then I met you. I saw your tattoos and heard your story. And I realized that everything I was taught might be wrong. He looked Daniel in the eyes. If your son is alive and we can save him, then maybe there is hope. Maybe our species do not have to be enemies forever. Maybe one person helping another person can be the start of something new. Daniel was quiet for a long time. Then he reached out and placed his hand on Catherall's shoulder. You remind me of Christopher, he said softly. He believed in people too. He always thought everyone deserved a chance. Was he right? I do not know, but I would like to find out. They spent the next 2 weeks planning. Catherall used his military access to get a small patrol ship. He told his commanders he was taking it for a routine inspection mission. No one questioned him. They loaded the ship with supplies: food, water, medical equipment, and tools. If they found survivors at Station Erebus, they would need to be ready for anything. On the night before they left, Daniel sat alone in his quarters and looked at the tattoos on his arms. So many names, so many memories, so much loss. He touched the name on his inner forearm. Christopher Price. He had gotten that tattoo 5 years after his son disappeared, when he finally accepted that Christopher was probably dead. But now, there was hope again. Dangerous, terrifying hope. I am coming, son, Daniel whispered to the empty room. If you are out there, I will find you. I promise. The next morning, they boarded the patrol ship and flew into the darkness of space. Behind them, Valorous Prime grew smaller and smaller until it was just another point of light. Among millions dot ahead of them lay the restricted zone, filled with debris from the Great War. Somewhere in that darkness was Station Erebus. And somewhere inside that station, there might be answers that Daniel had been seeking for 30 years. The journey would take 6 days. 6 days of traveling through enemy space in a stolen ship, with no backup and no rescue if things went wrong. But Daniel Price had risked everything many times before. He had fought battles that everyone said were impossible to win. He had saved hundreds of thousands of lives when everyone told him to give up. One more impossible mission would not stop him. Nothing would stop him. Not until he found his son. Station Erebus appeared on their sensors like a ghost rising from the darkness. It was massive, a structure of black metal spinning slowly in the empty void. All its lights were dead. No ships surrounded it. It looked like a tomb floating in space. Life support is very weak, Kethral said, reading his instruments. But there's still power going to the central section. Daniel leaned forward in his seat. His heart was beating so fast he could hear it in his ears. Can we dock? Yes, there is an emergency airlock that should still work. They guided the small patrol ship toward the station. Daniel's hands were shaking as he put on his spacesuit. After 30 years of searching, he was finally here. Finally close to answers. The airlock was old and rusty, but it opened when Kethral entered the override codes. They stepped inside the station and felt the cold immediately. It was freezing, so cold that their breath made clouds in the air. Emergency lights on the floor glowed dimly, showing them the way forward. Their footsteps echoed in hallways that had not seen anyone for 15 years. Dust covered everything. The silence was complete and heavy. Kethral led the way, following signs toward the central research area. They passed empty rooms filled with broken equipment. They walked through laboratories where experiments had once been conducted. Daniel did not want to think about what kind of experiments they were. Then they reached the main chamber. Daniel stopped breathing. The room was filled with stasis pods. Rows and rows of them, at least 50 in total. Each one connected to a central power system. Most of the pods were dark. Their displays showed flat lines. Whatever was inside them had died long ago, but some of the pods still had green lights blinking on their panels. They are still working, Kethral whispered. Some of them are still active. Daniel walked forward slowly. His legs felt weak. His vision was blurry with tears he had not even noticed forming. He reached the first active pod and wiped dust from the glass window. Inside, frozen in sleep, was a human woman he did not recognize. She was young, maybe 30 years old, wearing a military uniform. He moved to the next pod. Another stranger. A man this time, also in uniform. Then the third pod. Daniel stopped. He placed both hands on the glass. His whole body started shaking. Inside the pod was a young man with brown hair. His face was relaxed in sleep, looking peaceful. He had a small scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood accident. He had his mother's eyes, though they were closed now. Christopher, Daniel said. The word came out broken, barely a sound at all. Kethral came to stand beside him. He looked at the young man in the pod, then at Daniel's face. Is this him? He asked gently. Daniel could not speak. He could only nod. Tears were streaming down his weathered cheeks now, and he did not try to stop them. His son was alive, after 30 years. After all the searching, all the hoping, all the nights spent wondering if he was wasting his time. Christopher was alive. We need to wake them up, Daniel finally managed to say. Can you access the station's medical systems? Kethral was already moving toward the control panel. I will try. The next few hours were the longest of Daniel's life. Kethral worked on the computers while Daniel stayed by Christopher's pod, talking to his son through the glass. I never gave up on you, Daniel said softly. Not for one day. Your mother would be so proud of you. She always was. And I'm sorry it took me so long to find you. I'm sorry you have been alone all this time. The pod did not respond. Christopher's face remained peaceful and still. Finally, Kethral called out from the control panel. I found the wake-up procedure. There are 5 survivors in stable condition. I can start bringing them out of stasis now. Do it. The pods began to hum with new energy. Warm air flowed into the chambers. The ice that had formed on the glass started to melt. Display screens showed vital signs improving as the survivors slowly came back to life. Christopher was the third one to wake up. His eyes opened slowly. They were brown, exactly as Daniel remembered. For a moment, he looked confused, not understanding where he was or what was happening. Then he saw his father's face. "Dad?" he said. His voice was rough and weak from not being used for 30 years. "Is that really you?" Daniel was crying openly now, not caring who saw. "It is me, son. I am here. I found you." Christopher reached up with a trembling hand. Daniel took it and held it tightly. "You look old," Christopher said, and somehow managed to smile. Daniel laughed through his tears. "You look the same. You have not aged a day. How long?" Christopher asked. "How long was I asleep?" 30 years. Christopher's eyes widened. He tried to sit up but was too weak. Daniel helped him, supporting his son's weight like he used to do when Christopher was a small boy. 30 years, Christopher repeated. "The war? It ended a long time ago. The fighting is over. And you came for me? After all that time?" Daniel pulled his son close and held him. He could feel Christopher's heartbeat against his own chest. It was the most beautiful feeling he had ever experienced. "I would have searched for 100 years, Daniel said. "I would have searched forever. You are my son. I was never going to stop." Catherall watched from a distance, not wanting to interrupt the moment. He had never seen anything like this before. The love between this human father and son was so strong it seemed to fill the entire room. Later, after all 5 survivors were awake and stable, they gathered in the station's control room to plan their next move. The other survivors were members of Christopher's crew, 2 women named Lisa and Karen, and 2 men named Stephen and Paul. They had been on the reconnaissance mission together. When their ship was damaged, they had activated emergency stasis to survive. None of them knew that 30 years had passed. None of them knew the war was over. "What do we do now?" Lisa asked. She was the youngest of the group, barely 20 when she went into stasis. "We take you home," Daniel said. "Back to human space. Back to Earth." "But the war," Stephen said. "If we enter human space, the Valorians will attack." Catherall stepped forward. "The war ended 3 decades ago," he said. "Our peoples are not currently fighting. Travel between territories is restricted, but not impossible." The humans stared at him with fear in their eyes. To them, Valorians were still the enemy. They had gone to sleep in the middle of a war. "It is okay," Christopher said. "This is Catherall. He helped my father find us. A Valorian helped you." Karen asked in disbelief. "I know it sounds strange," Daniel said. "Believe me, I did not expect it either. But Catherall risked everything to bring me here. Without him, I never would have found you." The survivors looked at Catherall with new eyes. Not as an enemy, but as something they did not have a word for yet. "Thank you," Christopher said to Catherall, "for saving my father, saving us." Catherall nodded slowly. "Your father taught me something important. He taught me that strength is not about conquering the weak. It is about protecting them. I am still learning what that means." They loaded the survivors onto the patrol ship and left Station Erebus behind. It would remain there, spinning in the void, a monument to experiments that should never have happened. The journey back to human space took many weeks. They traveled slowly, avoiding Valorian patrols, stopping at abandoned stations to gather supplies. During those long days, Daniel and Christopher talked for hours. Catching up on 30 years of lost time, Christopher learned about everything that had happened since his disappearance, how the war ended, how his father had never stopped searching, how a young Valorian soldier had changed everything by choosing to help instead of hate, and Daniel learned something too. He learned that his son had become a man during those brief years before his capture. Christopher was strong and brave and good, just like his mother had been. When they finally crossed into human space, there were no attacks, no alarms, just the welcoming darkness of home territory. Kethral stood at the ship's window and looked out at the stars of human space. He had left everything behind, his career, his family, his entire species. He was now the first Valorian to live peacefully among humans since the war began. Daniel came to stand beside him. Any regrets? Daniel asked. Kethral thought about the question carefully. No, he said finally. I did the right thing. For the first time in my life, I am certain of that. What will you do now? I do not know, but I think I would like to learn more about your people. Maybe help build something new between humans and Valorians. Daniel smiled and clapped him on the shoulder. I think my son would like that. He always believed people deserved a chance. Was he right? Daniel looked at Christopher, who was sitting with his crew, laughing at something Lisa had said. His son was alive. After 30 years, his son was alive. Yes, Daniel said. He was right. The ship flew on through the stars, carrying its passengers toward an uncertain future. But inside that small vessel, something powerful had been born. Understanding, friendship, hope. Two species that had spent decades killing each other were represented by two individuals who had chosen a different path. It was a small beginning, but all great changes start with small beginnings. The markings on Daniel's skin told the story of war and loss. But now there was a new chapter, a chapter about finding what was lost, about forgiveness, about the strength it takes to reach across the void and see an enemy as a friend. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, that story was still being written.